think of the Guardian Angels when you first started?
Well, I've been thinking about the Guardian Angels for a while. Didn't know what I'd call it, but when I became a night manager at McDonald's in the middle 70s and went through my training in White Plains Road and Allerton Avenue and then got reassigned to Fordham Road in Webster, where there was far more volume and far more problems, I had to travel in from Brooklyn. I was living in Brooklyn, so I'd have to take the subways at odd hours, not during rush hours, but odd hours, the wee hours of the morning, the afternoon when schools would let out. So you'd see the kids come onto the trains, act wild and crazy, bum rush people in all directions, and then in the wee hours of the morning, the trains ran very slow, and it was just Muggers Express. So from trying to manage a McDonald's where there were crime problems inside, crime problems out in the street, crime problems on the subway going back to Brooklyn, couldn't escape it. And so because nothing was being done, I just figured out, look, I've done other things in volunteer service, recycling programs, a cleanup program there in the Bronx that was successful. I think I could get volunteers together to start patrolling the subways. And so it was just an idea that festered. And it wasn't until there was an increasing crime problem on the subways that I really focused in and then started to see what I could do to actually get a patrol. So I hit on the very first group of people that was in front of me. That was my crew. They really had no choice. I put the arm on them. You could say they volunteered, but they were really pressured to volunteer. And it was my closing crew. So it was mostly the guys who had closed the store with me. We'd leave maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, and we'd go out and patrol the trains, experiment. And then on other days, train and go out and patrol the trains. Until February 13th of 1979, we began the patrols. And it was just people that worked with me in McDonald's that time. Many of them who really did it because I either pressured them to do it initially or motivated them to do it.
What made you, why New York? Because you're from New York, right? Okay. How many supporters did you have, like, meaning like volunteers or like the police officers? Did they support you, or like the mayor when you first started?
When I first started the subway patrols for the Guardian Angels, we had almost no support. Whereas before that, I had run a cleanup program in the Bronx called the Rock Brigade with volunteers, and that had everyone's support. Because people liked it when, as a volunteer, you sweep the streets, you pick up the trash, you plant trees, you paint abandoned buildings, you cover the graffiti. People love that. Can't get enough of it. But when I started to shift our focus to patrolling subways, to trying to stop the crime, people immediately had a knee-jerk reaction that it was, you're a vigilante. You can't do that. That's against the law. And I said, no, it's not vigilantism. Oh, yeah, it's like Bronson in Death Wish, which was a very popular movie at that time in the movie theaters, which talked about a guy fighting back and using a gun as a way of him getting revenge for crimes that had been committed against his family. So in this instance, we were going out without weapons, no special powers or privileges, wearing a red beret, a t-shirt, making citizens rest if we saw a crime in progress, obeying the law. But people didn't want to hear that. And also it was at the time that the movie The Warriors had come out, about 8 days before we officially launched. And because The Warriors had so much of the movie about gangs on the subways, people don't naturally assume we were another gang, because there were a lot of gangs in the Bronx. We were Charlie's Angels, we were the Hell's Angels, we were vigilantes. People had us pegged as everything we weren't. The mayor called us vigilantes, so that made it very tough. And the only real supporter we had at that point was a father, a priest of the nearby parish that we had our first headquarters at, St. Nicholas at Tollentine, Father McNally. Other than that, there was nobody.
So at first, when you first started Guardian Angels, it was pretty hard.
Well, it was very hard because we had 13 volunteers, including myself. But as you know, in anything with volunteers, only half of the people actually show up, and only half of those are real hardcore. So out of the 13, maybe 4 that were hardcore, 8 who would show up from time to time. The other 5, they would sort of drift in the wind. Lucky for us, it was an interracial group. So it had black, white, Hispanic, and Asian, had Chinese. So we covered the gamut. We were just lucky when it came to that. And that became our hallmark. So people didn't perceive us as being all white, all black, all Hispanic. We even had Chinese in it, which was very unusual. So in that regard, we were able to get off to a good start. But in terms of the police being opposed to us, they gave us grief a lot, a lot.
And you got like the crime rates, you got them down, not fast, but fast enough where they notice that you're doing some type of justice out there.
Well, the one thing that became noticeable is we just focused on one subway line, the number 4 train, which was called the Muggers Express. And we focused on it only from that part that went to the last stop in the Bronx, Woodlawn Road, to 161st Street, Yankee Stadium. And we would ride around and around it. And after about a few months, the statistics indicated that crime continued to go up in the subway system. The only subway line that seemed to have a decrease in crime was the number 4 train at night. Now you didn't have to be a genius to figure out the only difference on the number 4 train was that at night you had the guys with the red berets out there, the guardian angels patrolling. And that even created more tension with the police, because then it was a reflection on them. Then people were saying, oh, you see, the guardian angels do a better job than you, and that made them angrier. So they even put more pressure on us. They arrested us, they harassed us, they said bad things about us, they made up things about us. They tried to drive us out of the subway, and they were almost effective. Almost.
What made you decide to come to Connecticut? Like, when, I know it wasn't my dad.
What made us come to Connecticut, actually, years and years ago, we were first invited to come up into Bridgeport. And Bridgeport had bad crime problems then, has worse crime problems now. But it was a senior citizen center on the west side of Bridgeport. And they were under siege. Their cars were being broken into. They couldn't go to the store. They felt like they were trapped. They could only stay in their complex. And one of their elderly leaders reached out to us. And we came and we visited, and we were embraced by the mayor and embraced by the police, which was different for us. We weren't used to that. So that's how we first got started into Connecticut. And then we branched out. New Haven, Hartford, Norwalk, those are the cities that we've actually either visited or established chapters in. We no longer have an active chapter in Bridgeport, but that's how we originally got involved in Bridgeport, and that was in the late 80s, early 90s.
And how many places is Guardian Angels in, like, statewide?
Well, in total now, it's 33 years since I started the Guardian Angels in 1979. So we are in 17 countries, 140 cities. We have close to about 5,000 members. So New York City is where it all started. But we're in most of the big cities you would expect, like New Haven or Hartford or Chicago or Washington, D.C. or Boston. But then we're in a lot of smaller cities also with populations less than 100,000. Like you wouldn't expect, like a Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, Easton, Pennsylvania. Those are relatively small towns. In every one of those communities, it's people locally who volunteer, who get involved, who go through the training, who go on patrol. And that's how we've been able to grow and expand all over the world.